This is exactly the reason. I just wrote a book called Burn, and it's all about how your body burns calories. I wrote it because, from my perspective as a scientist in this area, I see so much confusion and misinformation out there about even what metabolism means, right? I take that personally, because I see this as this really fundamental piece of our lives, part of who we are, that if we don't understand it, we're in trouble. So let's start from square one, right? Metabolism is the word we use to describe all the work that our cells do all day. So we go and we take these measurements in 2010, and using this technique, we measured men and women in the Hadza community, a good sample of them, and we got the results back, and we were totally shocked because they have the same daily energy expenditure. They burn the same number of calories every day as men and women in the US and Europe and other industrialized countries. It was the same. And that's, we account for body size, body weight. We account for fat percentages. We account for age. We account for gender. All the things you would typically account for in these studies. None of it makes a difference. Their energy expenditure per day is indistinguishable from you and me and everybody else in the US. So that was a just jaw-dropping, and we knew we were onto something interesting and something important about metabolism.
All right, welcome everybody to selfprinciple.org. This is our nonprofit podcast that we run. It's a 501c3. Self Principle stands for sleep, exercise, love, and food. I started this journey a few years back simply because what we wanted to do was to be the change of good in the world. There's so much stuff that goes on. There's so much hype. And the goal behind this show was really about getting leading experts who are not just, putting stuff on the web, but they're actually out there doing the research. They're pioneers in their work. So today is no exception. I'm delighted to have an amazing guest whose work you guys are going to find absolutely interesting. And today's topic is all about metabolism and why it's so hard for people to think of these terms on why you can't just outrun a bad diet, why you can't just figure out those basic things that we all hear as bro science on the internet. So let me not take up any of that, but let me turn it over to our delighted guest, Dr. Herman Pontzer. So Dr. Pontzer, let me start by asking you to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us who you are, tell us what you do, and then we'll get into your research, what I'm so excited about.
Sure, thanks for having me on. I'm excited about our conversation today. So I am an anthropologist. I'm an evolutionary anthropologist here at Duke University. And I am interested in how the body evolved to be the way it is today, how our deep past kind of shaped our bodies, and how that evolutionary history, affects the way that our bodies work today in these strange and wonderful worlds that we've built ourselves, right? So that our evolutionary history sort of still has this impact on day-to-day life now and health now. And understanding that sort of intersection between the past and the present has been a big focus of my work the last, 10 or 20 years, I guess. So, my focus within that area, because it's a broad area, has been energy expenditure, metabolism, because, from an evolutionary perspective, right, life is a game of turning energy into kids. So, it kind of boils down to that from the bare bones of the evolutionary biology of it. And so if you can understand how any organism spends its energy, you understand a lot about how it works, how it fits into its landscape, how its body prioritizes different tasks, how evolution has sort of shaped it and tuned it. And so our species is no exception. I've been trying to understand human metabolism, human energy expenditure for 10 or 15 years or so, in the US, of course, but also in other populations around the globe. So that's me in a nutshell.
So this word metabolism, it's, in some ways it's one of those, it might as well be called a 4-letter word, in that we get so scared about it, and there are so many myths around it. I'm a board certified bariatrician, and one of the things that I deal with is patients who are trying to lose weight. And the challenges they have is it's so hard. And, there's this concept of willpower and all that. But describe for me, what is metabolism according to you? And why is it just so darn hard?
Yeah, good question. So this is exactly the reason. I just wrote a book called Burn, and it's all about how your body burns calories. I wrote it because From my perspective as a scientist in this area, I see so much confusion and misinformation out there about even what metabolism means, right? And I take that personally, because I see this as this really fundamental piece of our lives, part of who we are, that if we don't understand it, we're in trouble. So let's start from square one, right? Metabolism is the word we use to describe all the work that our cells do all day, right? So you have 37 trillion cells. Each one of them is this tiny microscopic factory, right? Bringing nutrients in, chopping them up, making different, enzymes and proteins, and then spitting those back out for use elsewhere in the body. And all that work, just like any factory work, right? All that work requires energy. And so when we talk about metabolism, we're talking about all the work our cells do. And we can either, if we wanted to measure metabolism, right, we could either measure all the parts and pieces that go into the cells and come back out. And some people do that. It's called metabolomics. Or we could just measure the energy, and that'd be another way of doing it, because those things have to be related to one another. The work that the cell is doing has to be reflected in the energy that it burns. And so when we look at how much energy our whole bodies burn, well, what we're measuring is the cumulative energy of all of those cells working together, and we call that your metabolic rate, your energy expenditure rate. And that's metabolism. So it's all the work your cells do all the time.
So when people start to try to figure this out in their own health, and your book is so fascinating because of the populations you looked at, but let's now take metabolism and start talking about what the heck do you do in your own life, and how does your research and that you did that was so fascinating about what these different tribes were doing, how does that relate to all of this?
Yeah, so I think we need to start off understanding that, again, if metabolism is all the things your body does all day, we're only aware of a small portion of that, right? We're aware of moving, basically. That's the most obvious way that we see our metabolism, or we experience our metabolism, is the energy it takes us to move. And that's your muscles burning energy to make that movement happen, and exercise, or even just walking down the street or whatever. But your body is doing so much more that we're never even aware of. And so I got interested in how the human body burns its energy and how it prioritizes across all these different tasks in populations that aren't what we would call weird in anthropology. So weird stands for Western, educated, rich, democratic, right? So we don't know really a whole lot about how energy expenditure happens in sort of traditional societies, hunting and gathering societies, for example, like we all evolved in, or even farming and horticultural societies. And those are the environments that have really shaped the human body, because those environments, those lifestyles were around a lot longer and a long time before kind of modern industrialized lifestyles. Okay, so that's what we wanted to do. Starting about 10 years ago, we tried to get energy expenditure measurements, metabolism measurements in a hunting and gathering group known as the Hadza population in northern Tanzania. We can talk about them in some detail if we want. And we've done this in other populations around the globe as well. And these groups are all really physically active, and we wanted to know how that affects how many calories they burn every day.
So that's a huge cliffhanger. So let's start off with the Hadza and tell me about, because what I know about them is they're incredibly active. So how does that relate to sort of us who may not be that active, or we think that I can have that double cheeseburger and then just go out for a quick run and they'll fix all of my problems?
Right, that's right. So when we started this work about 10 years ago, there were no measurements out there in the literature, in the scientific literature. Nobody had ever done it to go and measure total energy burned per day in a hunting and gathering population. It had never been done. People had estimated it, and they'd estimated that it would be really high because of how active these groups are. But nobody had ever actually gone and measured it. And so we wanted to go and make those measurements. And so we used this technique called doubly labeled water, which is this really physiologically direct measurement of energy expenditure. It's the gold standard for doing this kind of work. And we were able to partner with a population called the Hadza, which is this population of traditional hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania. Now, a little bit about them. They don't have any crops, no domesticated animals, no machinery or electricity or plumbing or anything like that. They live in these grass houses, in the savannah of northern Tanzania, and the men hunt with bow and arrow, and the women gather plant foods out every day. So it really is the kind of lifestyle similar in these important ways to the lifestyles in which our species evolved, hunting and gathering, getting your food from the wild every day. And they get as much activity in a day doing that as the typical American gets in a week. Okay? So we've measured this, and that's a real ratio. So that's how physically active they are.
Well, I have to
I'm
tell
out of
you,
water. So we'll see how my
that is the most fascinating point right there. Wow. In a day compared to what we're doing in a week. Amazing.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
right. That's right. Yeah. So much. And so when nobody had measured energy expenditures, and so we wanted to go do it because we were so sure that they would have these really high daily energy expenditures, and we thought that would be important as a point of reference for folks in the US and other parts of the industrialized world that have this obesity problem, because like you said, it's this idea out there that, that we are becoming obese and overweight because we're not burning enough calories and exercise. We're not exercising enough. And so we wanted to go measure that kind of energy gap. How many more calories are they burning compared to us? And then we would have a kind of a target maybe in public health, how many more calories we should be burning every day to get up to our evolved levels, let's say. Okay, so we go and we take these measurements in 2010, and using this technique, we measured men and women in the Hadza community, a good sample of them, and we got the results back, and we were totally shocked because they have the same daily energy expenditure. They burn the same number of calories every day as men and women in the US and Europe and other industrialized countries. It was the same. And that's, we account for body size, body weight. We account for fat percentages. We account for age. We account for gender. All the things you would typically account for in these studies. None of it makes a difference. Their energy expenditure per day is indistinguishable from you and me and everybody else in the US. So that was just jaw-dropping, and we knew we were onto something interesting and something important about metabolism, and we've been following that work up ever since.
Wow. So let me ask you, people always say, well, you got to exercise to increase your metabolism. What your work is clearly showing is your metabolism is your metabolism, and you walking, a week's worth of exercise in one day isn't changing that. That's fascinating, and it sort of goes against everything that everybody is learning right now.
Yeah, it was a shock to us for sure. And I should just say, the first thing you do as a scientist when you get surprising results is you assume you're wrong.
Correct.
Right? So we did this with a different methodology using heart rate tracking rather than isotopes, got the same number. We've since been able to do this in other populations in other parts of the world. Other traditional groups, we get the same result. We've been able to do this. We've been able to look at the animal literature with this, and we get the same results again and again. Lifestyle doesn't change the calories you burn very much. Now, you might be able to push it a few calories here or there, but it's not enough. It's not a big effect is the point. Your body's trying to keep energy expenditure within a pretty narrow range. And so, this has really big implications. We didn't go into this with any ideas about, really having new information to bear on the obesity epidemic. But that's what we ended up with, because this had big implications for how we think about exercise. And by the way, let's say this right now. Exercise is still really important. It doesn't change that. But it changes the way that exercise seems to be important, because it isn't changing calories per day.
All right. So now you really got my mind spinning in all sorts of different directions. So having this information, how do we now translate it to the American population? First, they're already sedentary. We can't get them to move enough as it is. Second, their diets have become absolutely horrible. We are so addicted to salt, sugar, and fat and everything that's processed and quick. And our, version of exercise is me with my smartphone, clicking and saying, somebody deliver it to my house. I mean, it used to be I even had to go to the fridge. I don't even have to do any of that. I can just get somebody to deliver everything to me. So, how does your stuff now
Yeah.
translate into what's going on with people in terms of their weights, in terms of how, if they're trying to go on this journey to become healthy?
Yeah. Well, I think it simplifies things in some ways and it complicates things in some ways. So the simplification is this. If energy expenditure is really hard to budge, which our work and other people's work shows that it is, then if you want to get yourself in a healthy place weight-wise, you've got to worry about the energy that's coming in, the energy that you eat, because the energy you burn off is going to be pretty stable no matter what you do, right? So the way you're going to change your weight is by changing how many calories come in versus how many calories go out, right? Fundamentally, it has to be that. And so the energy coming in is the bigger lever that you have. It's the better tool for weight loss and weight management. And we are the only people who have been saying this. This has, been kind of there as an important idea in nutrition for a long time. But I think these data kind of point to why it's so true, why diet has to be where you start for weight. Okay, so diet's really important for weight, and that's a whole discussion about how we implement that. But okay, diet for weight, exercise for everything else. Okay, because if exercise isn't changing how many calories you burn, well, then it must be changing the way that you burn your calories. You're burning those calories with your muscles and not on things like inflammation and stress and everything else. And so maybe exercise has these effects that we haven't really appreciated before, but it doesn't change the message that we sell to exercise, but it's a different tool for a different job. So the simplification is you got two tools for two different jobs, diet and exercise. You can't trade one for the other, right? And if you want to think about how each of them work, now that's where it gets complicated. What kind of diets do we want to focus on? Exactly what does exercise do in our bodies? That's where it gets complicated again. But I think initially we can just say diet and exercise, two different tools for two different jobs.
Now, let me ask you, if we change this question around a little bit, there are people who go through drastic weight losses. So some may say, I'm just going to go ahead and do some crazy idea on fasting, but not, alternate day or even Walter Longo style of doing a fast mimicking diet. I'm going to do like 28 days straight of fasting. Now, by the way, when I work in the ICU side, we do this in the sense that we have patients who are intubated and they're getting tube feeds. They're literally going a form of fasting because their calories are reduced and so forth. So we see them lose weight. But the question is, does the opposite hold true? In other words, can you damage your metabolism in a way? So here we have, extra energy expenditure, meaning exercising all this one didn't necessarily increase it. But can you slow your metabolism down? And is there any data around that?
Yeah, that's really fascinating too. So work by people like Kevin Hall, but others as well, has shown that if you go on these crash diets, if you just really restrict the energy available to you, your body, well, we're evolved beings, right? We're evolved organisms, and there is a long evolutionary history of you and your ancestors for 500 million years, since before you're humans, trying to figure out, trying to navigate a world where food can sometimes be really scarce. And so your body has all of these mechanisms that can come into play that reduce your energy expenditure when you sense that you're starving. Okay, so if you decide, oh, I'm going to fix this tomorrow, and I'm going to just stop eating, then your body will sense that as starvation basically, and your metabolic rate will come down. And so, the hormones in your body that regulate metabolism will decrease, like thyroid hormone, for example. A lot of other signaling goes on in your body that tells you that you're starving. And the total calories you burn every day will actually be reduced a lot. So there's a great study on this with the Biggest Loser contestants, if you know about that show. These people come in and with extreme obesity. They are, really desperate to try to turn things around. And what's done to them on television, I think, is just completely unethical and unhelpful. They go on a crash diet, and they get exercised to within an inch of their lives, and it's all done as a spectacle. And Kevin Hall, his work, he's followed these people, he's studied their metabolism, what this does to them. Of course, he didn't want this to happen to them, but he was able to follow along and see what happens to them as they go through this process. their metabolisms crash, their energy expenditures crash, and they stay low for a long time, even after the show's over for years. Um, and because of that metabolic rate slowing, and because exercise isn't actually a very good long-term tool for weight loss either, they gain their weight back, right? So there's a sad long-term, tail there. It just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So these big crash diets, or even for that matter, crash exercise programs, we know just aren't effective because the body goes, wait a second, we're in crisis mode here, and you put the brakes on.
Yeah, and I remember, in that paper, I think it was all of the contestants except one that had basically regained all the weight. But what was really sad about that show is it convinced an entire generation of essentially, teenagers to young adults that crash dieting works. And this whole thing, if you go on social media these days, this is my 60-day, body composition change,
Right.
and so forth. And it is so incredibly unhealthy. By the time patients come to see me for bariatric surgery, I ask them, how many times have you tried and failed? And they tell us all of these things and how they've basically gone on crash diets, one after another after another. Everything that promised them results. And for us at least, weight loss medications, we have a very checkered past with. We had the fen-phen-like sympathomimetics that speed up your system, they mess up your cardiac valves, and we didn't know. We had others that seemed very effective, but they increased suicidal ideation because they just shut down all your pleasure centers. So this concept of this rapid change that Kevin Hall talked about it's fascinating. But your work is so instrumental in showing people that when you talk about metabolism, where you have the most bang for your buck, or ROI, return on investment, is on what's going in your mouth.
Yep.
And I think that's a fascinating concept. So tell me, in terms of your book, what sort of pearls that you have that you can share because I want to make sure people actually go and read this book, because I'm finding it fascinating. I'm almost done with it, and I'm really, really interested in the work. So what are some things that they can hope to achieve out of this book?
Yeah, well, it's not, I want to be clear that it's not a diet book in the sense that, there's not a menu chapter or a recipes chapter or anything like that. Because, my job, I think, as a scientist is to give people the tools to understand why different diets might work for them and other diets might work less well for them, and what the sort of options are, right? I'm not trying to sell anybody on a particular diet or exercise program. I'm trying to tell you how it works so that you can implement those in your own life. So I'm telling people the principles. I'm trying to tell them, the principles of how their bodies work. And here are the principles that we know from both my work and other people's as well when it comes to diet. First of all, it really does come down to calories, right? The calories that you bring in versus the calories that you burn off will determine whether your weight stays the same or goes up or goes down. It really is about calories. So this idea that calories don't matter, if anybody tells you that, either they don't understand how it works or they are lying to you. Those are two possibilities. So then the trick becomes, because as you say, the biggest bang for your buck is the food that you eat in terms of your weight. So how do you change the calories that you eat without doing these crash diet things, without doing these dramatic things that your body revolts against? And we know how that works too. Okay, so we can do this at different levels. If we look at groups like I work with, like the Hadza, they are the same body weight their entire adult lives, right? Good years, bad years, good seasons, bad seasons, right? And they're not trying to maintain, they're just living their lives. There isn't a bathroom scale in the entire region for them to even check. They don't care. But we know when we go and work with them, we measure them every year. And so they're stable. How are they stable? Well, they're eating foods they're whole foods. They're unprocessed whole foods. And it's a mix of meats and starchy carbs and honey. They eat a lot of honey. So that, any one of the villains of the modern diet wars, if you don't like meat, well, they eat meat, sorry. If you don't like sugar, well, they eat honey, which is the same as just sugar and water. You don't like starch, well, they eat starch too, right? And they eat mixes of these things throughout the year, but the point is they're not processed, right? And, they're maybe not as easily available either. And so, not that they're ever starving, but, they can't just go to the fridge and just pile up a whole bunch of food either. So anyway, that's their context. And in that context, the human body does exactly what it should do, which is maintain body weight flawlessly for life. How do we take those principles home? Well, people have looked at this too. If you look at foods that make you feel full on fewer calories, they are foods that make sense. It makes sense given what we know from the Hadza. These are foods that have higher protein, foods that have higher fiber, foods that are not processed, especially sort of overly processed, like prepackaged food with lots of added oils and sugars put back in. If you stay, if you keep with the unprocessed foods, high protein, high fiber, people do a lot better maintaining healthy weights without trying too hard. And the thing is, if you do that, you don't have to count calories. So you kind of can ignore the calories, but understand that it really is about the calories that are coming in. Your body just feels full on fewer of them, so you don't have to worry about it.
And speaking of that, what's interesting is we have tried to mimic essentially nutrient-dense, calorie-poor foods by creating all sorts of devices that have had terrible outcomes. So we have balloons that go into your stomach. You inflate them so that it gives you the sensation of being full. We have, bariatric surgery, specifically sleeve gastrectomy, where we cut the stomach and make it smaller, so you have the sensation of being full. And all of these are tricks, but they all have lots and lots of issues that come in. So we have even beads. You take in the beads, they inflate inside your belly, they get really large, and inside your stomach, and they give you the sensation of full. But the basics of studying tribes like the Hadza people, and there's another group in there that I want to ask you about that I have a hard time pronouncing, but the beauty of these groups is they're showing you that there is a better way. And what you said about them being the same weight essentially almost their entire lives is fascinating to me. Tell me about the other group that's in your book.
The Shuar or
yes.
the Tsimane?
Both, because either one, and I kept trying to say, how the heck do I say these names? And I was like, I got to make sure I ask him before we start. And I totally blanked on asking you, but tell me about these groups, because I'm fascinated.
Well, so let's start with the Shuar. I think in some ways they're a great segue here. So the Shuar are a population in the Amazonian basin in Ecuador. And they live in a lot of them are still in very remote villages in sort of camps that do a lot of hunting and fishing and gathering wild plant foods in the rainforests that they live in. They also do, hope everybody's okay over there. They also do a little bit of farming. So they plant like plantains and manioc and some other basic crops. And my postdoc at the time in my lab, he's got a professorship at Baylor, Sam Erlacher. He was interested in energy expenditures with the children in that population because, lots of good reasons there, but one is the childhood development is so interesting in any way, but how children develop in these sort of energy stressed environments is a really important question in anthropology and public health. And of course, childhood obesity in the US and the developed world is rampant too. So there's implications all over for this work. And he did work similar to what we did with the Hadza. He measured energy expenditures, he measured activity, he measured resting metabolic rates. And what he found was that the Shuar kids are in these really remote rural camps, have the same energy expenditures as kids in the US and the UK. So this is a similar result to what we found with the Hadza, right? They're more active. They actually have higher resting metabolic rates because their bodies are fighting bacteria and parasites more often because they don't have these clean environments that we live in. Anyway, so they should have higher expenditures, but they don't. Just like the Hadza, they have the same total energy expenditures. But here's what's interesting. When you look at populations of Shuar communities who have moved into towns and into like small cities in that area, right? Now we can ask the question, what happens when you take these traditional cultures and you put them into developed environments, right? These engineered environments that we built for ourselves. Here's how they respond. Energy expenditure doesn't change, right? So those kids still have the same energy expenditures. That hasn't gotten pushed around. But their body fat percentages are going up. and they actually have body fat percentages that look like kids in the US and the UK. So they're starting to develop, right, these overweight, obesity issues potentially. They're going that direction, and it's not because the energy expenditure has changed, it's because the diet's changed. Now, what's changed? Well, the macronutrient content hasn't changed much. Carbs, proteins, fats hasn't really changed much, but what they have access to are the foods that you buy in the supermarket, right? These processed foods. And so, that's like aha, exactly what we would predict, but nice to see it played out so well that it really is development, it really is food processing and kind of how we engineer our food environments today that is having these effects on body weight and body fat. It's not so much changes in activity levels, those are important too, I want to reiterate, but it's not so much the energy that you're burning that's changing body size and composition, it's the food that's coming in.
Well, okay, so let me ask you a question that, most parents go through this. Well, little Timmy comes and wants a donut. Well, okay, so, if you just go ahead and little Timmy, go out and run around the block and come back, I'll give you a donut. And this is an interesting misconception that people have, but what's your take on these ideas that, hey, I can have a whole pizza, but because, I went to the gym for 20 minutes this morning on an elliptical going at 2 miles per hour, because I did that for 20 minutes, that's such a long time, it kind of fixes everything.
Yeah, no, I wish it were that easy. I think we all wish it were that easy. It's not. First of all, even if you wanted to play that game, let's have a hypothetical world where it does work that easily. The energy that you burn on exercise is so little compared to the energy available in a donut, for example. A typical donut has, let's say, 300 kilocalories in it. That's a 3-mile run, okay? Not walk, run. If you walk, it's a 6-mile walk, okay? So that's but anyway, it doesn't work that simply anyway because the math doesn't sort of fall out that way. Your body will adjust to your exercise regime, and over time, you don't even get the 300 calories from running. It's sort of your body evens out. Okay. I've got little kids, so this is an issue near and dear to my heart. And it's a struggle because, the kids don't really understand or care about obesity and cardiometabolic disease. That's so far down the road from them. And they're kids and they don't, they want to have the donut, right? Of course, they're kids. What do you do? Well, I am the last person to tell anybody how to raise their kids. I think that's a hard one just from first principles. But also, tell you what we do is we try to keep healthy food in the house. And I think this is good for adults too. The kids can't have the donut if it's not there, right? And so, our kids occasionally have snacks and occasionally have dessert, that kind of stuff. We aren't too draconian about it because I think if you make it be this big, scary thing or this big, shaking your finger all the time, I think that can lead to unhealthy feelings about food as well. So it's a real tightrope here. And I'm not a food psychologist, and I'm not so this is just a parent telling you what I do based on what I know. But try to keep healthy food in the house, try to encourage healthy snacks as the first choice. And I think that's the best you can do. I think what you have to do. And you can't tell little Timmy, in your example, that running around the block earns him the donut, because I think that sets up the wrong understanding about how these things work.
And I think, the point that you're making is, we've had, at least 3 or 4 dozen guests talking about nutrition, and every single one of them has said exactly the same point, which is if it's going to be in your house, it's going to be in your mouth. It's that simple. So the best sort of willpower trick that you can do is exactly that. Have healthier options. That doesn't mean you deprive people or you make it so that, if your kid goes to a party, they feel like, oh my God, I can't have any of it. But trying to have better options. And then, when we talk about like BJ Fogg's work on tiny habits and trying to do habit pairing so that they're still getting some better choices in, even when they're having the bad food. Those are some really simple things to do. But this is such an important point because there is so much junk food and the advertising looks, I've never seen a advertisement for broccoli that made it look sexy and that I was like, wow, I can't wait to eat it.
It's
and yet
true.
Pop-Tarts and...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is what we're up against, right? Again, from an evolutionary perspective, what is your body, what is your brain, what do you come into this world ready to handle? You don't come into this world ready to handle the pairing of food and sex. Oh my God, right? Your brain goes crazy. You're not ready to handle the pairing of fats and sugars and salts and the kind of mixtures that they call it the bliss point, right? When they're engineering foods, that you never feel full and you can always have another bite. I mean, that that's remarkable. That's never happened before in the history of life. And then, on top of that, you go to the supermarket, the foods that are most energy dense are the cheapest, right? Think about that. That's completely backwards ecologically, right? You go into a forest or into a savanna or any natural habitat, the energy dense foods are the animals. They're harder to get. The energy light foods are the plants. Those are easy to get. So usually the easy to get foods are low energy density. The harder to get foods are higher energy density. We have flipped that relationship as well in our supermarkets. So there are all sorts of reasons why we are just unprepared for the environments we've built ourselves, and we have to start engineering in healthy habits to break that, because I don't think we can expect to just do it with willpower. I think that's the big mistake here, is that, let people decide and they'll make the smart decisions. Humans don't do that.
It's so true. So we hit upon the Hadza, we hit upon this other group, the Shmer. Now let's talk about the third group.
The Tsimane, sure.
Yes.
So they're another group similar to the Shuar in some ways. They live in the Amazonian basins in Bolivia. They are culturally distinct, but their lifestyles are pretty similar. And so, again, a lot of wild food gathering, hunting and fishing, as well as some farming. And, what's interesting about them is just how much we've learned about, what you can expect from healthy aging, I think is one of the things we learned from the Shuar. They have the healthiest hearts on the planet, right? Basically no hypertension, no heart disease, nothing like that. They also stay a healthy weight their whole lives. They eat a diet that's similar to the Shuar, so it's high in carbs, high in sugars, but because it's not processed, they don't have a hard time maintaining healthy weights. But their exercise, just like their physical activity, just like the Shuar, just like the Hadza, is high every day, and it's one of the reasons that we have just really great measurements of them through their whole adulthood into their 60s, 70s, and even 80s without heart disease. So heart disease doesn't have to be inevitable for us in the West. It's not an inevitable fact of aging. If you can stay active and watch your weight, and it helps for sure, you can expect to have a healthy heart into your old age.
That's phenomenal. When we talk about old age, especially here, it's an interesting sort of experience. If you look at some of the other cultures, for example, Okinawa, Japan, or other places, they have this concept of moai, where you grow up with a close group of people. As you get older, you have purpose, and you have 100-year-olds that are working in the fields 8 hours a day. They're active and they're moving. We have the opposite thing. The second you start to get older, there's such a stigma that you can't perform as well, that you need to think about slowing down. Why is he doing that at such and such age? It's almost like, at least in the US, what I find is there's just such a stigma associated with age.
Yeah, I think that's right. And whereas in the Tsimane or the Hadza or the Shuar, any of these more traditional cultures, in Japan, as you're talking about, there's a reverence for age, right? And you expect there's an expectation that you sort of keep doing what you're doing for as long as you're able, even if you slow down a step, right? And I can tell you, it's true with the Tsimane. With the Hadza, I've spent my share of days following groups of women while they're out foraging for plant foods, tubers or berries. And keeping up with the grandmothers is no joke, They're walking fast and they're keeping up with everybody else, and they're, I think, when we worry about frailty and we worry about, kind of healthy aging and how do you keep your mind sharp and your body sharp, there's real lessons to be learned from these traditional groups if we want to learn them, if we want to kind of broaden our minds about what's possible.
So This has been such a fascinating interview. You've touched upon kids, you've touched upon the adults, we've touched upon the folks who are getting older, or I would say wiser,
Yeah.
with experience. Bringing all of this stuff together, I always ask people as we come to an end is if you had to give us, two or three or however many you want, sort of just key takeaways that people can walk away and start applying in their own lives today, what would you say?
Yeah. It's always hard to condense, a worldview into a couple of bullet points, but here's what I would say. Get outside. And here's why. If you're outside, you're probably moving. You're not eating out of the refrigerator. Hopefully you're with some friends. If I could add anything, I'd say get outside with your friends. And you're getting sunlight, right? Your body responds well to that. Fresh air and sunlight we do well with. So if you could just do one thing more, right, I would say get outside. And it's because it does all of these other things for you. Diet and exercise are two different tools for two different jobs. True enough. If you get outside, you're taking care of both of them, right? Connection with family and purpose and getting out of your stuffy house. You get outside, you're doing all that stuff. And so get outside. The average American spends 87% of their time indoors and another 6% of their time in their car or something like that. It's horrible, right? And here we are sitting inside as we do this, so I realize the irony or the hypocrisy in that statement. But really, I think if we could all just get outside more often, that's a great way to start getting exercise into our lives, being healthier about our dietary choices, and hopefully being healthier overall.
I love it. Where can people learn more about you, your work, your book? Tell us that real quick.
Sure. So the book is called Burn, and you can get it anywhere you buy books, Amazon, or your local independent bookseller down the corner. That'd be great. You can look online and find us here at Duke University, the Pontzer Lab, and see what we're up to these days. And I'm on Twitter at Herman Pontzer, and you can find me there. And just keep an eye out for anything in this space. It's where we try to do our work and get people to know about it. So we're trying to always be out there.
Well, I love it. And this has been such an honor and such a delight having you on the show today. And I got to tell you, I've learned so much, and I can't wait to follow your work to see what's going to be the next project you guys end up working on.
Well, I'm excited too, and thanks for the conversation. And looking forward to more.
Thank you so much.